You are experiencing the Knuckleheads of Liberty podcast.
It is February 24th, 2025, and welcome to the Knuckleheads of Liberty, where we're bringing you the people and the organizations fighting for liberty around the country and in your region. And today we have returning to us the conservatives concerned about the death penalty. And we have here Nicholas Cote here, who is a state strategist with that organization. And he's going to talk about some of the stuff that they're doing and some of the things that are going on with the death penalty right now. But before we get into any of that, let me introduce you to our panel. In our lower left-hand corner, we have Leon, the word Brathwaite, last word in Liberty. He is a retired engineer in the state of California. In our bottom right-hand corner, we have Nicholas Cote, who's here with us to talk about his organization. And my name's Jason McPhee, and I'll be your host today. So, like I said, we're going to talk mostly about the death penalty today. Before we start, we always go into a quote of the day, and that is sort of going to give you a flavor for the show as well. And so today's quote is actually from Victor Hugo. So maybe you could bring up the visual, Leon. This quote, Victor Hugo was, he's an author, a poet, a politician from France from years and years ago. A particular story, Les Miserables, and gosh, I can't remember the other one. But anyways, there's he bottom line, well known. But he was also an advocate against the death penalty. And this particular quote is kind of telling, I think. He said, "You say society must exact vengeance and society must punish. Wrong on both counts. Vengeance comes from the individual and punishment comes from God." So I thought that was kind of an interesting quote, especially the vengeance comes from the individual, because, really, I mean, it's hard for society to have a collective idea of vengeance. I mean, I can certainly understand a person wanting some, vengeance, but it's hard to imagine a society really being able to enact that. So I did think that was kind of an interesting quote on that part. But anyways, I'm curious to think what you guys think about this particular quote.
Yeah, Nicholas, you can go.
Yeah, well, first, great to be here, Jason and Leon. And this is a wonderful quote. And it's something that really speaks to me and why I oppose the death penalty. I believe that anybody can be redeemed, but at the same time, when you read about a particular case or you see a particular story, you're naturally going to be affected by the details of that story. And that's even more true if you have a personal connection to it. If you're a family member of somebody who's murdered or something like that. I understand the raw emotions that you're going to feel, the desire for justice that you're going to feel. But I don't think it's the job of the state, of the government, to decide that this individual can no longer seek redemption. That is up for God. That's not for me as a human being, as an individual human being. That is certainly not up for the state that we know just makes so many mistakes in all walks of life. And so I would leave that to God, just like Victor Hugo says here in the quote.
Well, I am, full disclosure, I struggle with the use of the death penalty. Because when you have cases where you have a heinous murder, even though all murder is bad, right? But some of them are just god awful. You wonder what the price you should pay for that. The accused, what price should they pay for that? But on the other hand, I also believe that God gives life and only God should be able to take it away. So I really do struggle with that morally and philosophically, even though it's embedded in our laws and in our constitution. But it's a real struggle for me. I try to come to terms with it. I can't seem to reach some comfortable point on either side of this issue. So I don't know. I mean, I think the quote here is fine. And the Liberty quote of the day, I think it's fine. I think it's thought-provoking, but I truly struggle with this issue.
Yeah, and Leon, I think that's one of the things that's clear with society is we seem to ebb back and forth, and so I guess we'll get into that a little bit throughout the rest of the show on this. But it is one of those things where we've clearly had a death penalty, but it seems to sort of society seems to push back on it. And then, as we'll see now with Trump coming in, maybe there's a little bit of a push on his side for it. So, but we'll explore that. But let's jump to Nicholas's organization. So now, Conservatives Concerned About the Death Penalty. So you can, by the way, let me give you people the website here. It is conservativesconcerned.org. So if for some reason you have to leave the show early, this is where you can go to find out more about them. There's a lot of good information here and things they've been involved with. And here is the team. By the way, we've had Demetrius Minor on the show several times in the past, and this is Nicholas's first time on the show. So we're glad to have Nicholas here today. But we do have a video that we kind of shortened and edited, and I think, though, it's a good representation about what the organization is about. So I'm going to share that right up here at the beginning of the show. So, Leon, can you play a KOL 1, and then we'll let Nicholas expand upon that?
Hi, I'm Demetrius Minor. I'm the National Manager for Conservatives Concerned About the Death Penalty. We live in an age where many are afraid or unwilling to confront the harms of the past. But we can't get to where we're going if we don't know where we've been. I'm standing right here at the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. It was here 58 years ago that an event known as Bloody Sunday occurred. 58 individuals peacefully protesting for equality and justice were met with violence and brutality at the hands of 150 members of law enforcement. Now, 2 generations later, just like those who crossed this bridge, we still have so much to fight for to see liberty and justice for all. One of the most crucial ways to achieve this is to transform our criminal justice system. Racism, inequality, and violence still permeate our justice system. What needs to be created is a system that centers on healing, accountability, and safety for all. The death penalty has a history of racial bias. It perpetuates violence and doesn't keep us safe. It is inefficient, it is unethical, and it supports the existing flaws that are within the criminal justice system today. Together, we can transform the justice system. But we can only end the death penalty if we partner together. Shoulder to shoulder, we will build a more safe, equal, and just future for all Americans.
So I think that gives a pretty good flavor. So, Nicholas, I guess, is there anything you wanted to expand upon that video, about sort of, what your organization is about and what you guys are doing?
Yeah, well, I thank you for showing that video. It had been some time since I had seen it. And I think just watching it again now, something that really stands out to me that might be worthwhile to talk about is, you may have noticed, because you just showed our website and then looked at that video, that we've done a bit of a rebrand since that video. Both we've shortened the name from Conservatives Concerned About the Death Penalty to just Conservatives Concerned, and we've changed the logo accordingly. And I think that video actually speaks to a lot of the reason why we've done that. The death penalty, although it's no longer in the name, remains our priority. But the truth is, the criminal justice system has a lot of problems in it. The death penalty is sort of the most extreme, sentence that can be carried out. It's where we really see all of the problems with the criminal justice system, come to a head. But there are other problems that we're facing, and we want to be able to talk with conservatives about those, to educate them, to think through our history as a nation, about how the system has been used historically, how it's continuing to be used, and what we can do as conservatives to produce better policy that actually holds people accountable, makes people feel safe, encourages public safety, more effectively spends taxpayer money, meets the needs of victims and their families, and does all of these things without all of the harms that the death penalty brings.
So do you think the death penalty is unjust or is immoral? Or, what is your main concern about the death penalty?
Yeah, I came to the death penalty more really as a matter strictly of public policy. I used to support the death penalty, like a lot of people who are involved in Conservatives Concerned. But what happened is I started looking more and more into how it works, or really how I should say, how it doesn't work, and concluded that it's not an effective public policy. And so my initial entry into the issue area was particular cases that I was following. Back in the day, there was, I don't know, 15 years ago or so, there was a case in Mississippi, a man named Corey May, who lived in a duplex. He was a black man, and police had a warrant for the other side of the duplex. It was a drug case, but it was the middle of the night, and he heard people barging into his home. He thought his home was being invaded, armed intruders. He didn't hear anybody announce themselves as the police. And so he was there defending the life of his toddler who was in his arms, and he shot and killed the police officer. And it was an absolutely tragic situation, but he was initially convicted and sentenced to death. And I was looking at that as a case like, this is not a just result. If this is what actually, what the death penalty actually leads to, I need to take a look at this more broadly as a public policy. There was still, for a number of years after that, a sense that I could construct an argument in favor of the death penalty. And I'm sort of reminded of what the former Republican Attorney General Mark Earley of Virginia stated. He oversaw executions in Virginia as the state's Attorney General. And he could say, I can see an argument, but it's getting tired. It's a tired argument. It just doesn't work anymore when you actually see how it's carried out, when you actually see that innocent lives are at risk, that all this taxpayer money is wasted, that we could be more effectively spending that money in other ways, improving public safety. So even putting the morality of it aside, and I think there are compelling moral arguments to end the death penalty or against the death penalty, it just doesn't work as a matter of public policy.
Yeah.
But
sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Jason. Go ahead.
Well, no, that's okay. You finish with your thought, and then I'll jump in. So.
But how do you? I mean, where do you draw the line? Whether it's a moral, or philosophical, or legal argument, where do you draw the line? I mean, every day, in this great land of ours, police officers have to draw their weapons and kill an American citizen on the street. That's execution, no trial, nothing, and that kind of stuff. They do it because they are law enforcement, and because at times they are himself or other citizens are in imminent danger. So he's a police officer, and there are how many 800,000 law enforcement in the land can implement the death penalty on the spot. So where do you draw that line? Now, in the case of the death penalty that we are talking about here, is people who have been tried, evidence have been presented in a court of law, and the person have been found guilty, and they have been sentenced to death. So where do you draw that line between a police officer doing his job and also, quote unquote, sentencing someone to death versus someone who goes through the system and end up being sentenced to death?
Yeah, well, I think that even, in those types of cases you're talking about on the street, it's the reason the police officer takes that action, as you stated, is because either their life or the lives of others are in immediate danger. And we know that's not the case for the death penalty. But even in those other cases that you're talking about, I think a lot of American citizens have questions about what happened in those situations, and questions about the decisions that law enforcement have made, about and I think we need more accountability and answers in across the board in the criminal justice system. But in the case of the death penalty itself, you mentioned, the jury hears evidence, there's a conviction, it goes through a court of law. But even with all of that, we know that mistakes are made. Just last year, there was the 200th exoneration from death row. That's 200 people that we know about who were sentenced to death, but did not do it. And there's a case, right now, just the last couple of months ago, a number of Republican state legislators in Texas being the highest executing state, really had concerns about a a death sentence in a particular case, a man named Robert Robertson, who was convicted of murder based on a theory that was basically the shaken baby syndrome, that his young baby tragically died. And there's real scientific doubt about that theory. There's certainly no consensus about that theory. But there's now doubt about the conviction. And so a number of conservative state legislators who even in theory still support the death penalty were saying we don't trust it in this particular case. We think that the courts need to revisit this. So even when we know it goes through the courts, there's so many things that can go wrong, whether it's ineffective assistance of counsel or just some evidence gets lost or innocent mistakes happen. It's not just that prosecutors or judges are bad people who are trying to throw innocent people in jail or sentence them to death. That's not what's happening. It's that innocent mistakes happen. Eyewitnesses get things wrong. Sometimes evidence gets mixed up. These things happen. But because those mistakes happen, we just can't trust the death penalty.
Yeah. And Nicholas, that's certainly something that I feel as a libertarian. I mean, I am skeptical of government making mistakes everywhere. Let alone with people in the most critical situations where the state is literally deciding whether somebody lives or dies. But we actually have a few numbers I was going to bring up. So you mentioned the 200 exonerations. And so one good place where people can go, I found, to find some of these numbers is Death Penalty Information Center. And so this is a place where people can go and look state by state to find information. And here they have that number 200 on record. And they show kind of a track record, too, of, over time of how these exonerations have gone. And they also break it down by inequities of race as well, and how this may have been applied in the past. That's always a little bit complicated because, maybe race played a role, maybe it didn't. But, if we can kind of see that the numbers don't look like they're coming out even, at least tells us there might be some kind of a problem out there. But yeah, so there's that. And also, too, here's a chart from Amnesty USA, and it also shows the sort of how the death penalty has been applied, at least for the last 20 or 30 years. That it looks like there's sort of a peak around 2000, and it's sort of been trending down. Even Trump, who often claims to have the greatest and biggest numbers on everything, the numbers of death penalties that happened while he was president were pretty low here. So, anyways, yeah. So those are just a few numbers that people can be aware of. But I guess one question I did have for you is there ever a situation where you can imagine anybody should get the death penalty? Because I mean, certainly this is something that somebody might push back on who's on the other side of this. Like, imagine if there's a Hitler or maybe some guy in the movie, like in Silence of the Lambs or somebody like that. Should anybody ever get the death penalty, I guess, with the state delivering it? How would you answer that?
Well, I think that Victor Hugo quote actually spoke to that a great deal. And I can certainly imagine those cases. But the truth is, that's not how the death penalty actually works. It's not the so-called worst of the worst who usually gets the death sentence. It's not even the serial killers. It's people who come from marginalized backgrounds. They're not able to get better attorneys, and really what the death penalty, because it's so arbitrarily administered and effectively randomly administered, it's only a handful of counties in the United States that still seek the death penalty. That's part of the reason that chart you showed, shows the number of executions dropping, is there are far fewer sentences being handed out. There are far fewer counties seeking the death penalty. And so at this point, it's so arbitrarily administered that's just not how it works. It's not about a handful of cases here or there. And the truth is, I think, and Leon kind of stated this earlier, every murder is awful. Every violent act is awful. And what the death penalty encourages us to think is that some of these cases are worse than others. And the truth is, for the families, for the people affected, they are all awful. And what we actually should be doing is, rather than this false promise to just a handful of victims, and it really is just a handful, that the death penalty is going to eventually give you closure or peace or healing, we should be trying to do more for all of those families, all of the victims' families, and not just select a handful and say maybe an execution is going to be carried out 10, 20, 30 years from now, because that's, to be honest, how long it takes, and instead actually help them heal, help them process the trauma that they've experienced and the loss.
So in the way you see it, you believe, if I am correct, that there are no cases under which we as a society should be administering the death penalty to anyone.
Yes, I don't trust the government to do it in any case.
Okay, fair enough. Okay.
Sound like a libertarian.
Yeah, really. Yeah.
I come from a bit of a libertarian conservative background, so.
Okay. Well, and that does bring up a question. So this is conservatives' concern. Is there a particular reason why the organization is focused with conservatives, or do you guys try to reach across? Is this, I guess, what's the main reason for the focus with conservatives?
Yeah, that's a great question. We certainly do work with people across the aisle, across the political spectrum, and have wonderful relationships with liberals, progressives, Democrats. But Conservatives Concerned actually started really as a state organization in Montana. There was an effort to repeal the death penalty in Montana about 15 years ago, and Montana obviously is a deep red, Republican supermajority or close to supermajority state. And so the focus at the time was on identifying and mobilizing, educating conservatives against the death penalty. And although that particular legislative campaign was not successful at the time, so many conservatives in other states saw what was happening in Montana and said, I want to be a part of that. I'm a conservative and I oppose the death penalty too. One of the problems that we see is so many conservatives out there think that because they're conservative, they're supposed to support the death penalty, or they think that they're the only one who supports repealing the death penalty. And the fact is that's just not true. More and more conservatives are coming to the conclusion that the death penalty doesn't work and doesn't align with our principles. And so what we do, the reason we focus on conservatives is because we know that there are so many other conservatives out there who just need to know that they're not alone, that they can join an organization that, with other conservatives and work to end the death penalty. And then the other part of it is that if you look at the map and like on the Death Penalty Information Center, for instance, and just see where's the death penalty, what states still have the death penalty, it's overwhelmingly states that are still Republican dominated. And so if those states are going to repeal the death penalty, conservatives are going to be a part of it. And so the work that we do is to educate conservatives just about all the ways that as a public policy, it doesn't work, the cost, the lack of deterrent, that doesn't improve public safety, as well as just, does this align with conservative values and principles? And so by having those conversations with conservatives, we're seeing that more and more of them are questioning the system, and we think it's only a matter of time before we're able to make progress in some of those states.
Yeah.
Could you expand on that alignment issue? I mean, what conservative values do you think the death penalty, the administration of the death penalty violates?
Yeah, I mean, so, as a matter of, this is true for libertarians as well, a belief in limited government, a belief in fiscal responsibility as a principle, that we want to make sure we're doing right by families and survivors of crime, and that the justice system is fair, I think is a fundamental principle. There should be fairness, and that when it's arbitrary, then you don't have a system that can be said to be fair. And that does not align with conservative values and principles. And then for many other conservatives, they'll come to the issue because they're looking at it from, valuing respect for human life, and that's a fundamental principle as well.
Okay. Well, I guess before we get to the end of the half hour with our public access, I guess I wanted to show a case where you guys are having some, I guess, progress on this issue, and that's Indiana, I guess, where there has been recent push by a Republican lawmaker to try and introduce a bill to end the death penalty there, or at least come back and restrict its usage to some degree. So, Leon, maybe you could play KOL 2 so we can kind of get into what the issue is about on that.
Legislature. Joanna Green has represented several death row inmates, including Joseph Corcoran, whom the state put to death last week.
It's a human system and it's therefore fallible.
She says House Bill 1030 is the first time she's seen State House Republicans push to repeal the death penalty, a move she hopes will gain traction next year.
Executing an innocent person, that chance is never zero.
State Representative Jake Teshka says his pro-life views informed his decision to support the bill. He himself a victim of a road rage shooting in 2021.
I have tremendous sympathy for victims in these situations, but ultimately think that the death penalty is unnecessary.
The bill would also commute the sentences of all current death row inmates to life imprisonment without parole.
So there's a sort of an overlay of the case. They also have just a little bit more in the piece, too, that says how it's going there. So, Leon, could you play the next one? It's KOL 3.
But Teshka says reaction to the bill from Republican colleagues so far has been mixed. If the bill doesn't gain traction, Teshka says he will push for a more transparent execution process. Currently, Indiana is one of 2 states that does not allow the media to observe executions unless an inmate gives a seat reserved for a loved one to a member of the media.
It's a good thing for society to know what happens, I think, and to be able to be aware if something were to go wrong, and we know that that does happen.
We did reach out to Governor-elect Mike Braun's transition team to find out whether or not he would sign a bill repealing the death penalty into law. We have yet to hear back. Reporting from the State House, I'm Hannah Adamson.
So it sounds like there's a real push there to get something done, but it may not actually happen if the governor doesn't sign it, I guess. So what are some of your thoughts on that particular case, Nicholas?
Yeah, I think Representative Teshka really laid out the case well, in favor of repealing the death penalty. And I think we have more work to do to, talk with other Republicans in the state, to talk with the governor even, to just show that this is not an effective public policy, that it, for all of those reasons that he stated, that it just doesn't work. But the fact that we're seeing, a real effort to repeal the death penalty in a state like Indiana, that again is a very conservative state that Republicans control in the legislature as well as the governor's mansion. This is an issue that conservatives are coming around on. Conservatives are going to be the key factor in repealing the death penalty in these states that still have it.
And let me just break in here, too. If you're watching on public access, we're going to talk more about this and maybe what we might expect, too, from the Trump administration coming in on this as well. So you're going to have to come online, though, to catch the rest of that. So come check us out at knuckleheadsofliberty.com, and you can catch the rest of it there. So back to the show. So, yeah, this is something that, something that jumped out at me from that as well is the idea that, well, if they can't get the death penalty stopped, there's issues there of even transparency, I guess, of people being able to witness this, which you would think that would be something that you'd want it to be completely transparent in a case where the state is making a decision like this, sort of a life or death decision. That certainly as a libertarian, I would think we should want things to be as transparent as possible. So that sort of jumped out at me. Is that something you could expand upon maybe a little bit? Is this a problem in most places with the death penalty, issues of transparency?
Yeah, absolutely. There is a lack of transparency across the board, across the country regarding executions. Now, most states don't restrict witnesses to the execution quite as much as Indiana does, but there are still massive restrictions and a lack of accountability and transparency. And actually, this is the other part when I was telling the story of how I came to oppose the death penalty as a public policy. It was this issue exactly. I was living in Virginia at the time. The governor, I don't know if you remember, Terry McAuliffe, the former Democratic National Committee chairman at one point, Clinton aide. He was the governor, and he was trying to get a bill passed that would have made executions more secretive, that would have hid information from the public about how the state was acquiring lethal injection drugs. And, I I still had these sort of reservations about the death penalty, or was wondering maybe it could work in a few cases. But I asked myself, what is he trying to hide? Well, I'm a taxpayer here in the state. Why doesn't he want me to see contracts? I can see the contracts for who's building the roads, who's doing and anything else in the state. Why can't I see that? And so that was another factor that led me to this. And we're seeing that across the country right now in Arizona. Unfortunately, there's going to be an execution just in a few weeks. It'll be the first execution in a few years. And the reason that it's happening right now is that actually when Governor Katie Hobbs took office a couple of years ago, one of the first things that she did was sign an executive order to establish an independent review into the state's death penalty, to really look into, in particular, there were a few botched executions in 2022. There were serious questions about how the state was acquiring lethal injection drugs at the time. It spent $1.5 million acquiring more drugs than it could ever use, and didn't say who it was getting them from. In the past, it's had drugs seized at the airport by the Food and Drug Administration. And as I said, the executions were botched. So there were real questions about what the state was doing and how the state was carrying out executions. And so Governor Hobbs, paused execution. She said, we need to take a look. She hired a retired federal magistrate judge to look into this. And after nearly 2 years of an investigation, the judge was abruptly fired before he completed his review. What we've seen of the review is that he saw the main problem with the method of execution in Arizona is there's no transparency or accountability. And rather than actually address that problem, the governor of Arizona has just decided that their own internal review is sufficient and is comfortable carrying out executions again, even though all of those questions that were there when she signed the review in 2022 are still there. And so this is a deep problem that, even if you think that the death penalty might make sense in theory, I would encourage you to ask yourself, well, how does it actually work? Why is the government, hiding information? Why are they spending so much money on lethal injection drugs, and we can't even say where they're from? So those are real questions that I think everyone should take a look at.
Yeah, maybe Doge and Elon Musk can take a look at that as well. Yeah, it seems weird, like when you talk about funds that are spent on this or anything else, and to be able to figure out what's going on. It just seems like there's so many areas of government where we don't even know what's happening. So.
But would you find the death penalty more palatable if we had the maximum transparency?
I think having transparency, I wouldn't find it palatable because all those other problems would still exist. But I think at a minimum, if voters and taxpayers knew what was being done in their name and with their money, we could have a better conversation about evaluating it as a public policy. Transparency is necessary as a feedback mechanism for democracy, for an informed citizenry. And so we can actually have that debate. We can actually have a real discussion about the death penalty if just we have more information about it.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, it is something for myself, because I do feel like I'm somebody who's sort of transitioned like you, Nicholas, over time, because certainly when I was younger, to me, the death penalty made sense. And over time, as I've become more skeptical of government and them getting things right, that's sort of been a shift for me. Is just seeing a naturally, if I'm skeptical of government in a lot of areas, it's sort of like, well, why on earth wouldn't I be skeptical of this ultimate decision about government getting things right? So this is just, and the idea that you can't even get transparency screams that there may be something wrong here. So, as we're seeing, with all kinds of areas of government where we're sort of lifting up the curtain and seeing that there's all kinds of stuff that is absolutely nuts going on. So, are there other areas right now where you guys are having a good push against the death penalty?
Yeah, I mentioned Texas earlier, and you saw looking at our webpage that we have a state director in Texas, Nan Tolson. And I also wanted to really highlight Oklahoma as well. That's another state that is historically very high executing, just like Texas. But we're seeing more and more conservatives, even in these states, that have used the death penalty so much historically and even recently, coming to question the system. There's a bill right now in Oklahoma that would institute a moratorium on the death penalty. And basically what's happened in Oklahoma is back in, I think it was 2017, all of the problems that we've talked about today were happening in Oklahoma. All of these issues with the death penalty were happening. And there was a bipartisan review commission to look into what was going on, to make recommendations. And they made, I think, 45 or so recommendations, and virtually none of them were ever implemented. And so it's 8 years later. The state has carried out all these executions since then. There are many more on the way. There's at least one case in which conservatives have deep questions about innocence, a man named Richard Glossop. There are all these other cases going on that we're probably like, well, we had this commission make recommendations and we're still about to execute someone we think is innocent. We need to do something about that. And so this bill in Oklahoma would have a moratorium. It would require basically the state to look back at those recommendations and improve them. And that's something that we're seeing even in the state like Oklahoma that has carried out so many executions in the past. That it's just the question of, does this work, is one that more and more conservatives are asking themselves.
Yeah. Now, one question I wanted to ask too, and this is something that may make some conservatives maybe a little skeptical about the case against the death penalty, but occasionally in some of these exonerations, we see that maybe somebody is exonerated and then they come back and they commit another crime of some sort after they get out. Is this a common thing, or is this how common is that? I guess when somebody is exonerated, are most of these people truly innocent, or is it ever a technicality, I guess, that some of these people are getting out on?
No, I mean, it'll vary what the exoneration is based on. But no, that's not the usual case, is that it's just a technicality, or it's somebody who, is going to end up back in jail for something else. There are exonerations that are based on something like Ray Crone in Arizona, for instance, whose conviction rested on junk science. It was bite mark analysis. And it was absolutely junk science, and he spent years in prison for a crime, that he did not commit. And when he was asked, when he was released, why do you think God let you go through that? Why did God, punish you for years for something you didn't do? And he said, that's not what God was doing. God was trying to, give me a sign for what to do in the next 10 years, in the next part of my life. And that's to educate other people about how the system, doesn't work, and all these risks that are out there. And the truth is, there are probably a lot more people who are innocent that we just don't know about. There isn't DNA evidence in the vast majority of cases. It was ultimately DNA evidence that cleared Mr. Crone, but it just doesn't exist in the vast majority of cases. If a conviction just relies on, a couple of eyewitnesses or a discredited scientific theory or something like that, it can be very difficult to ever overturn. And so what we'd really like to see, is just more skepticism at, across the board, that just you can't rely on, even prosecutors who are doing their jobs well and aren't withholding evidence or anything like that, that to convict someone and sentence them to death, it's just not worth the risk. That taking one innocent life is unacceptable.
Well, and that's something I wanted to jump on real quick, because you said something there that to me it would be such a powerful argument for maybe even a lot of conservatives too, and that's junk science. I mean, the idea that certainly I'm somebody who loves stories of real science, but one of the things that so many conservatives were confronted by during the pandemic and the lockdowns and stuff is that there are some questionable scientific theories that the government is occasionally pushing on society. And this idea that maybe somebody is being thrown in jail or convicted on something like a bite mark analysis or something else like that, where, these could be, kind of shaky ideas. and we're gonna maybe execute somebody over that, or put them in jail for the rest of their life. This is, and I think a lot of conservatives are confronted this idea that, hey, you're going to lock me down for several years, where I can't go to my business or my kids can't go to school, and you're not even going to let me hear the other side of a scientific argument, in some cases. So I think that maybe that's a pretty powerful argument, maybe to push back against the death penalty. Just occurred to me as you were talking, anyways.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree. And similarly, I would say that's true when you look at something like prosecutorial discretion. I think more and more conservatives, over the past few years, have looked at the justice system, at least in particular cases, and wondered, was that the right move? The prosecutor had a lot of authority here to charge this case in a certain way, and that's very much the case in the death penalty. And it can lead to real injustice. And so, yeah, absolutely. Looking at things like that, looking at these concerns that conservatives have about other things, about other ways that prosecutors might have used their discretion, or that science is used in one way or another for certain policy ends. That absolutely, that if you don't trust the government in those ways, you really shouldn't about the death penalty.
Yeah.
Is it that even, all systems that we live under here in the United States, or anywhere in the world for that matter, systems created by man, I use that in the generic sense, and all systems created by man must have problems and errors within them. There's no way to get around that. But is it then the contention that even one mistake or two mistakes in that system is too much, is a bridge too far? Because, sure, we may get it right 99.99% of the times, but that one life, or those two lives that we took over the last 10 years, or the 5 lives that we took over the last 10 years, is that a bridge too far as you're concerned?
I think it is, but even to put it into context with some numbers, in the modern death penalty era, there has been about 1 exoneration for every 10 executions. So you can see what the error rate, and that's a conservative estimate, really, what the error rate probably is, because again, we don't have DNA evidence, in all these other cases. And so we're not just talking about 1 or 2 people, that the error rate can be that high, I think is a real concern.
Well, I think that now's probably a good time to talk about the pushback that we're seeing in the other direction. So with the election of Trump, Trump is a huge supporter, I guess you'd say, of the death penalty. And so this is something that he is right away. What he's come in and done is he's signed some executive orders, I guess, that are trying to push to get the death penalty reinstated in some areas. And so we do have a little bit of a clip of that. I think one of his advisors was at a White House press briefing and explaining what some of these are. But Lynn, maybe you could bring up the visual first and just show, this is the executive order on whitehouse.gov. So restoring the death penalty and protecting public safety. And so this was signed January 20th, 2025. And it goes into some of the specifics that he is pushing for. But we do have a video that summarizes that really quickly. So Leon, can you play KOL 4?
He has also restored the death penalty at the Department of Justice, including for illegal aliens who commit murder, including for those who murder cops, and including for all of those who threaten Americans with heinous acts of violence. The death penalty is back. Law and order is back. The streets are being made safe once again.
So again, it's a sort of a push that this is all about public safety and law and order. But let me play you. There's sort of a little bit of a montage of some of the things he said about the death penalty over time too. So just so people can understand, I guess, what a big supporter Trump is of the death penalty. So this is Leon. Can you play KOL 5? This kind of shows. These are mostly clips from his last presidency and things he said, but he's saying a lot of the same things now as well. So this isn't, really taking it out of context at all.
I've always supported the death penalty. I've always supported the death penalty. I don't even understand people that don't.
We have to bring back the death penalty. They have to pay the ultimate price.
Especially for terrorists and especially for people that, killers that you see so many with the girls that are being killed and then they capture these guys. I am so for the death penalty.
The right punishment, and we all do, for cop killers is called the death penalty.
Spies in the old days used to be executed.
Bing, and it goes quickly, right? It's called, you're dead. Treason. It's treason.
Unless you have really, really powerful penalties led by the death penalty for the really bad pushers and abusers, we are going to get nowhere.
I'm also directing the Department of Justice to propose legislation ensuring that those who commit hate crimes and mass murders face the death penalty, and that this capital punishment be delivered quickly, decisively, and without years of needless delay.
So I've got a few thoughts on this, but the main thing, though, I wanted to find out from you is, this seems to be a major push for conservatives in the other direction. And do you find that this is being taken, I guess, to heart by most conservatives, or is this something where you see an area for pushback that a lot of conservatives might be skeptical about this push that he's making? Because clearly this is sort of a renewed charge, it seems like, on the conservative side.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, you've shown the clips and the executive order, but the death penalty is primarily still a state matter. The vast majority of death penalty cases are at the state level, and they'll continue to be. And at the states, we don't see conservatives saying, "Oh, well, President Trump is saying this, so we can't talk about it." Whichever state we're in, whether it's Indiana or Arizona, Montana, states we've been in, just organizing, educating conservatives, it hasn't changed, since Donald Trump has been saying those things, that more conservatives they're willing to have a conversation. They're willing to take a look at the system. They're willing to evaluate it as an actual public policy. They're asking themselves those questions about, the executive order was titled, improving public safety and does this improve public safety? And we can have those discussions with conservatives at the state level, and we're continuing to make progress, no matter what he's doing or saying.
Yeah. Well, this is one of those areas where I guess for me, I look at Trump and as far as just full disclosure on my side, and I'm a libertarian, so I didn't actually vote for him, but I see him as a vast improvement on a lot of areas over our previous president, Biden. But here, this is one of those areas that I certainly am concerned about, because and I would think that Trump would have a little bit more skepticism too. I mean, we've seen somebody who it appears that the legal system has been weaponized against him in a lot of ways, and certainly against some of his supporters with respect to the January 6th crowd. I mean, to the point where he's literally seen it necessary to override our justice system and hand out pardons, right? And the idea to believe that the justice system is so capable of being weaponized and abused that you would think you need to come in with the extraordinary situation of pardons. It just seems to me an incredible leap of faith then to think that the state is not going to be abused in potentially handing out death penalties. I mean, I saw that one clip where he says treason, like that's something that the death penalty should be used for. And maybe potentially it could be in some case. But the point is, that's practically what they were accusing him of, is treason, right? With the insurrection. I mean, a very thin line on treason and insurrection, right? And that's what they were accusing some of his supporters and himself of. And you would just think that there'd be kind of a, hey, the state can get these things wrong for maybe terrible reasons where this can be weaponized. To me, this almost seems like a pure case where this should convince people that the state can make mistakes, not. Anyways, that's sort of my take on this particular issue. But does that ring true for you as well? That the state can, literally be politicized against some people, and that's maybe a reason why we should be a little bit skeptical against the death penalty.
Absolutely, we've seen more conservatives express those concerns about the justice system in other types of cases, and again, I would just encourage them to consider, well, you've seen how it can work when the other side is in charge. Is it really a system that you can trust with the ultimate state power, and that's death? There is no government power that is more awesome and terrifying than the power to kill. And it's a mistake that cannot be reversed. And there's so many mistakes that we know about. And so absolutely encouraging those conservatives who are asking those very questions is something that we're doing. And we're continuing to make progress at the state level, having those conversations.
Yeah, that was something in particular, Liam, maybe you could bring it up, but I mean, we saw all of these cases where, apparently that the system was weaponized against him, where prosecutors literally said where they were trying to be elected, that elect me and I'll get this guy. Right? And we saw them come after him for hundreds of millions of dollars for things that apparently they wouldn't even charge other people for, which they could have, so it was
hundreds of billions, Jason, in New York.
Well, no, hundreds of millions though, right? That they came after. Hundreds of billions. Yes. Hundreds of millions. I think it was hundreds of millions of dollars with the
when the judgment against him. It was half $500 million. You're right. I'm sorry. I'll take it back.
Yeah, because you're sort of imagining that the way Trump might describe his own wealth as hundreds of billions.
My apologies.
But yeah. So, anyways, but it's just the thought that it's a clear case of weaponization, and it just seems like this is an area where not only does the state make mistakes, but the state actually can just be massively abused against some people. And here in this particular case with the libel fraud, $454 million in penalties, and with the case of E. Jean Carroll, $88 million in damages. And I mean, these numbers are almost unheard of, for the types of crimes that Trump was being charged with, and let alone whether or not they had merit is yet another question. But it's just the idea that we've seen the abuse that can happen. So it is one of those things that to me, this almost seems like somebody ought to go to Trump and say, hey, this is something that, maybe you might want to rethink a little bit. So what if this is used against you when you leave, or your supporters? So, anyways, this is something
I would take a slightly different view on that, Jason, and I'll tell you why, okay? If we don't punish misconduct, we are just encouraging it to occur. Now, it is true the Biden administration and all their minions throughout this, in various states, Georgia, New York, all over, it is true that they weaponized the Justice Department against Donald Trump. Now that Trump is president, our first thought or first reaction might be he's going to go out there and he's looking for retribution. But I don't think so. I think it's important that we get accountability. And I see that as far different. Now, if we're going to use the facts and the evidence to guide our decisions as to whether people should be prosecuted or not, I think that is accountability. That is not retribution. And I think if there were any wrongdoing, like whether it was the January 6th committee or any of these prosecutors who would weaponize the law and the department to go after Donald Trump, if there are any things that they have done wrong, any laws that were broken, I think they need to be prosecuted. Otherwise, we are inviting this thing to happen in the future.
Oh, sure, Leon. And this is not a question of what Trump, what the response of this new Trump Justice Department should be on that case. My issue of bringing this up is just the idea of skepticism on, when we have something like the death penalty, the idea that government couldn't be abused in that case. And here we see a clear case where government was abused, I believe, in some of these cases. I mean, we're just now hearing about some of the ways that people who were protesters were denied, due process in a lot of cases, who were there at that Capitol at the time. And so, and certainly this is a contentious issue, but just the idea of having more time. I mean, one of the things we heard Trump say in that thing is we need to have it fast and it needs to be expedient and all this. Well, I mean, it's taking several years for a lot of these people to realize how they might have been abused in some of these cases. And how the system may not have allowed them to have their complete due process. So, this is one of those areas where I think it kind of lends to this case of, hey, maybe we need to be a little more skeptical about, how fast we, swing the levers of justice here, I guess, on some of these. So, but anyways, so that was just the idea with the Trump thing. And so I guess, you're, but just to sort of round up on this issue though, Nicholas, you're thinking that, that there's still good argument to be able to not let this turn into a sweep for the death penalty, I guess, at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, your faith in the justice system shouldn't depend on who wins an election, and the fact that for a lot of people that's increasingly the case, I think just speaks to a deeper problem in that if that's how you feel, the justice system absolutely should not, be extended to the death penalty. And the fact that, even in the wake of comments like that from the president and from the executive order, that we're seeing Republicans in states like Indiana pushing bills to repeal the death penalty, I think shows that we're able to continue to do that work.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that certainly sounds, positive that, we still may be able to keep progress going on this front. I guess we're getting near the end of the show. One of the things we always like to end the show on is something kind of funny we might have heard out there in the public with our Knucklehead Noise Patrol. And so this one is just a short little quote where there was a bill being pushed recently in front of Congress and sort of a snafu on the words, but I think it might be kind of, I guess, illustrative of maybe kind of the idea of what some of these lawmakers understanding, I guess, of our current situation or historical backgrounds are to be able to get this. So this was something that was pushed forward. It had to do with the Alien Sedition Acts, I guess, and something that Ilhan Omar was pushing forward. But it's a really quick quote, but it's just to hear something that they accidentally said and they corrected. But it's, anyways, Leon, maybe you could bring it forward real quick. It's KNP1.
The last time the Alien Enemies Act was invoked, it was used to detain and deport German, Japanese, Italian immigrants during World War II.
Anyways, it's kind of a little fumble. You can realize it's probably she's just reading a teleprompter, but it does bring up the question that how somebody reads something where they see the two lines and they say World War and they might accidentally think it's 11. And it kind of, to me, it brings up a little bit of skepticism on a lot of these lawmakers, the idea that they could make that kind of mistake, and reading that and just, I don't know, maybe even it makes me a little skeptical about a lot of their understandings when they're trying to adjudicate things like the death penalty. So, because I just can't imagine reading that, even if it's on a teleprompter, and thinking, oh, this is clearly World War XI that we're talking about here. So, I don't know. Do you guys have any thoughts on that real quick as we wrap up?
People are fallible.
Go ahead, Nicholas. Go ahead.
Yeah. Who knows? Maybe these are some of the errors that could accidentally get somebody in trouble with the law, even in a capital punishment area where somebody just makes a mistake in the process.
These bozos might get up one morning and decide to nuke Canada or nuke someplace, one of our allies. When they're making mistakes like that. You're reading something. It is true, and it's it's a politician. So some staff must have wrote it as 1-1, right? So Roman numeral 2, of course, and but you're reading it. But when you say World War, and then the next thing you're gonna think is 11, that it kind of boggles the mind to think that. You're supposed to be an intelligent person. You're supposed to be one of the person holding the levers of power in our government. At least you should at least pause for a second and say, "Wait, this don't sound right," But it just spills out, Boy,
well, hopefully this makes people pause. Yeah, hopefully this makes people pause a little when they take faith in their government that they're doing a lot of things, including pushing for the death penalty. So Nicholas, I guess we're about the end of the show here, and so I'm going to bring back your webpage. Is there any last thoughts I guess you wanted to share with us, or any last messages you wanted to leave people with at the end of the show here?
No, I just encourage people to go to the website, get in touch with us. Even if you're not sure, that you fully support repealing the death penalty, we'd love to have a conversation with you. We have conversations every day, libertarians, conservatives, everyday voters, and activists who are skeptical about government in one way or another, and we'd love to talk to you. Awesome.
Yeah, I think that's one of the greatest messages to leave people with is, hey, skepticism about government. This is certainly one area to have a little bit of skepticism in. So thanks so much, Nicholas, for joining us today. And for our viewers, thank you out there for joining us as well. And if you're watching this before the next show, think about what you can do in your community to promote liberty. There's all kinds of ways you can get involved with organizations like this, or, you could potentially run for local office or something else that you might be able to do just to make a push for liberty in your community. Because, as we've seen in so many areas, they seem to be eroding our liberty all the time. So, we've all got to be part of that push if we want to maintain our liberty. So again, thanks so much for joining us. And until next time, stay tuned and stay free.
Well, yes, indeed. Thank you, Nicholas.
Thank you.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, always and forever.
Thank you for listening to the Knuckleheads of Liberty podcast. Find us on Facebook, Rumble, YouTube, your favorite podcast network, and at knuckleheadsofliberty.com.